can't have 7 engineers working on one thing. You don't work on the same project because there's too many people in
and
there
at some
at the same
point,
time.
9 women cannot have a baby in 1 month.
Hey friends, this is Podcast Ruined by a Software Engineer. I am Perry Tiu, and on this episode I get to talk to Natalie Kaminski, co-founder and CEO of JetRockets, a software company who helps non-technical founders build their dream applications. If you enjoy Podcast Ruined by a Software Engineer, don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on the new episodes. And you can pick up podcast merch at perrytiu.com/shop. Enjoy the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Podcast Ruined by a Software Engineer. I'm your host, Perry, and today with me is the co-founder and CEO of JetRockets, Natalie Kaminski. Natalie, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Awesome to be here.
I'm doing great. No, thank you. I keep on saying it's really the energy at the end of the day. And for me to be able to talk to you and understand what you do and what JetRockets is really a pleasure. One thing I could describe this episode, the theme of this episode, is consistency and discipline. Like, the stuff we're going to be talking about, it really does resonate with those kind of themes. But really quickly, though, who is Natalie and what is JetRockets?
Oh, it's such a loaded question, right? I mean, I always wonder, like, who can really respond to this question in kind of in a normal way? Who are you, right? I guess so many things, right? So, Natalie, I guess I am, first and foremost, I like to think of myself as a good human being, innately good person. I hope I am. I get excited about a lot of different things. I mean, I get excited about technology, about entrepreneurship, about getting stuff done, but I also am equally passionate about, being a mother to 2 amazing young women. I'm a friend. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. So many things. I'm recently, over the past few years, I have become a runner as well. So, you and I have talked about it a bit, right? So many different things. And I'm still working on discovering who Natalie is. But I guess for the purposes of this podcast, Natalie is a founder or co-founder and CEO of a company, JetRockets, as you said. And what JetRockets does is we help specifically non-tech founders launch their technical platforms, become tech entrepreneurs and bring new and exciting ideas to life.
This is amazing, just because everything you've listed requires discipline. Everything you listed requires skills, requires a way to manage all of it. And that's why, when you look at the portfolio of JetRockets, look at the stuff you guys help build. Because if I could summarize it on my end after discovering a lot of what is in your portfolio at the end of the day, you really help people bring their ideas into applications, web apps, mobile apps. There's a lot of stuff that you guys help build. So I can't wait to dive into all of that in terms of how you get to that point. Somebody could say, hey, it's just a web app, but trust me, there's a lot of stuff behind that web app.
Well, if I may just add, the variety of the stuff that we do, that's what makes it really exciting for me personally. Early on in the journey of JetRockets, we had an opportunity, like many companies do, is to just hone in on a specific industry, right? It's said in business that it's always best to go narrow and deep, right? And become truly an expert at what you do in a specific industry. And we tried that. We've experimented with various industries before. And we always came to we would make a full circle and we would say, you know what, we really get excited about getting involved with a lot of different stuff. So in our portfolio, you'd see healthcare platforms, you'd see educational platforms, you'll see travel applications, you'll see, publishing, e-commerce, marketplaces. There's a lot of cool, exciting stuff that we do. We've recently gotten a lot into femtech, which I personally, being a female, really excited to see more and more companies pour in resources, time, and effort into developing some new and exciting technologies in that industry.
I'm so glad you brought that up, just because people keep on saying that the luxury of working in tech is that it's so flexible. The skills are transferable, the systems are transferable, the logic is transferable, and you probably have a million examples with you about that. But before we jump into all of that logistics and all the technology behind it, one thing that can help people understand is how we got to this point of getting this knowledge and knowing, what to do with this knowledge at the end of the day. So maybe just to learn more about Natalie, what is home? Where did you grow up? What influences did you have that made you who you are today?
Oh man, like you're throwing some really tough questions at me. Who
I'm
are
so
you? What is
sorry.
home? No, no, no. This is I love it. This is super exciting. It's we're gonna get a bit philosophical here, I guess. So I was born in the Soviet Union, in the Russian part of the Soviet Union, in a city called Norilsk. And if you look it up, it's actually currently considered one of the closed cities because they do some sort of, I guess, research there, or you know, some some weird stuff is happening up there. But it's all the way up beyond the Arctic Circle, and that's where I was born. My parents luckily did not stay there very long after my birth, and so when I was about 9 months old, they moved back to kind of the mainland of Russia. And 5 years later, we ended up in Ukraine, where I spent the next 5 years of my life before we moved, my mom and I moved to Israel. My parents were divorced pretty early. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and then my mother remarried, and we moved to Israel with her new husband. And that's really where my childhood, or sort of not child, but like, my teenage years and kind of formative years took place. So at the age of 18, once again, I now on my own, my mom stayed in Israel, but I on my own had an opportunity to move to the United States. And so, I ended up first in Minneapolis, then in Boston, and now for the past 17 years, almost 18 years, I've lived in New York. So, when you ask the question, where's home? it's a tough one to answer because, I'm definitely a New Yorker. I've been here for 18 years. I had like two of my daughters were born in New York. I love New York. Several times my husband and I considered moving into the suburbs, but it just never panned out because I can't leave. It's like one of those, love and hate relationship. There's so many things you can hate about New York, but the things that you love always win. So I'm definitely a New Yorker. So New York is definitely home, but so is Israel because that's where I grew up. That's where my childhood memories are. But then when you look at what's happening in the world, Ukraine is very much a home to me. And, funny enough, Russia somehow, even though that's where I was born and that's, I suppose it's my first language is Russian, it never felt like home. Maybe because it was very, just very few years of my life that were actually spent there. So, I don't know. It's a tough one.
No, it's a tough one with a great answer, mostly because home, at least I would describe it, is the people around you. It's not exactly a physical location, and a lot of what you described, your family today, and yes, New York City is electric. The way I describe it, New York City is electric at the end of the day. I've never gone to live in Israel or Ukraine, but one thing I actually noticed, and you might be able to talk about this, is the tech behind all these cities is fascinating. I've gotten the chance to work with people based in Ukraine. I've gotten the chance to meet people that work on teams in Tel Aviv, and the technology behind these cities is absolutely impressive. So I don't know if you noticed that when you grew up about, hey, how at least Perry talks about Ukraine nowadays. Like some of the most brilliant engineers are based in Ukraine. I work with them like daily basis, and it's like, how do you know how to do this? How did you manage? Did you notice that when you were living in these different cities that, hey, they are tech cities. There are cities that have, I don't know, technological minds behind it.
Well, Perry, I mean, I would love to say yes, but remember, we're talking about 40 plus years ago. So very different times, right? So I left Ukraine back in 1991. Soviet Union was just falling apart. There was not much technology back then, for sure. Israel, on the other hand, yes, Israel has always attracted a lot of bright minds. And, as the internet has gained popularity, and absolutely, like, Israel has always been one of those kind of, progressive places in terms of new technologies being developed. And so I've seen some of that, not too much. Thinking back when I came to the United States, it was 1998. Technology in terms of your non-professional tech people, right? Technology was not as readily available as it is today for most of us. So my personal introduction to the world of tech happened when I was 18, When I first came to the United States, I got my first computer. I remember I installed, I think I had America Online back then. And you could still, there was this guy who recorded this message, "You've got mail." I don't know if you remember that or not. But I got into technology back in 1998. And the big talk of the town was Y2K. Are you familiar with what Y2K is?
Oh man, those year changes, those date types, those absolute,
Yes.
everybody hates it. Tell me more.
Well, the idea was that, the moment that the clock is going to go from, I guess, 11:59 p.m. to 12 a.m. the year, January 1st, 2000, the world was supposed to go kaput. That was kind of, and the reason for that was because so many legacy software was written using 2-digit numbers in their database for the year, right? So instead of saying, I don't know, February 0201 2024, it'd be 0201 24. Right. And it wasn't a problem for many, many years because, we were in 1900s. Right. And then people didn't think that far, I guess, into the future. And then suddenly they realized, oh, my God, now, year 2000 is coming and we're kind of the count is starting from the beginning. We're back to 00, 01, 02, and so on. So what are we going to do? And so there was a huge push back in 1997, 1998, 9, and so on to rewrite all of these legacy software and kind of re-architect the databases to be able to handle 4-digit years. So my first job was actually working for a company called Guidant Corporation. It was located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I was working in a very small department, and I was rewriting this data tracking system that was written in Sybase 6.0, if I'm not mistaken. And pardon me if I'm making a mistake here. It was 20 odd years ago, but that's what I remember. And my job was really to just run migration on the database to convert all those data tables from 2 columns to 4 columns, and then write a script that would convert the actual data. So boring.
Whoa. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I do get it. If you have to do it a million times, it's definitely different. But the way you're describing this is fascinating to me. Not only, one of the quote that I could definitely quote from you is saying that people didn't think ahead. I feel like this is something that I hear a lot of like software engineers, not just anything. People didn't think ahead. Yes, I agree with that statement. I'm guilty of it. Everybody's been guilty of it. But one thing I could put into perspective though is when you're talking about like Y2K and why it's such a big deal. Like there were billions of dollars there were billions of dollars depending on if it goes right, then it's fine. If it doesn't, then half the country probably doesn't have to pay their bills. Like all the mortgages are completely wrong. Like there's a lot of stuff behind it, which is why I understand that this introduction and this marriage of, hey, we got to validate this. We got to make sure it works. We got to figure out, hey, some sort of correctness to all this is a fun way to being introduced to tech. And for me to understand that is, you got your first job there. It's always like a big moment. Everybody's first job is something to remember. What did your background affect your ability to do this job, I guess? Because for me to think about like how did I know what to do? Like, I don't know. I did a bit of like math in high school. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, so how did you what was the skills that you had up to that point that allowed you to be able to poke at a computer? Even typing back then, I'm assuming, is very different. So maybe your take, your understanding.
Yeah, no, Perry, we're having an honest conversation here, right? So I'm going to be honest with you. I had 0 technical skills. I was out of high school, probably never really working with a computer before. My skills were, my programming skills were very rudimentary, based on reading a certain, book, introduction or some sort of like an intro book. What I did have, however, is a lot of chutzpah, as we say, as Jews, we say a lot of chutzpah and a lot of grit and really necessity to get a job. So I came to the US. I had $500 in my pocket, and I really needed to make this work. And I met someone. I was introduced to this group of young people who were maybe 2-3 years senior to me, and they were all having these jobs in the IT sector. Some of them were programmers, some of them were business analysts, some of them were QA testers, and they were all making good money, by the standards back then. and they were all working towards something. And I remember like one girl just bought a new car, and I was looking at them like, oh my God, I want that too. Like, how do I get in? Right. So really what happened, this whole craziness around Y2K created a situation where anyone with enough grit could get a job. And honestly, my interview went something like that. Hey, can you code? Yes, I can. Okay, you hired. So like, the situation made it extremely easy for me to get my feet into the door. But what happened next, like getting hired is one thing, and kind of BSing through your interview and, learning a few terms and kind of, creating a good first impression. But then what do you do after? And so what came after was really 6 months of working, 15, 16 hours a day, trying to get to understand what the hell am I doing? How am I going to get this done on time? And I would imagine that anyone with any rudimentary skills beyond what I had in the beginning could have probably done the same, in 8 hours a day. I literally had to work 16, sometimes even 20 hours a day just to get through the basic tasks, to make sure that my boss, my manager, wouldn't get the fact that like she doesn't know what she's doing. So like I was working my ass off literally, and I was really, I was really lucky. I had a few people who were helping me, and the internet wasn't as advanced back then. Like I had to go to the library still. I went to the library, I gotten some books, I sat down with people like, okay, how do I change this? How do I do this? How do I code here? And it was just a lot of hard work. And maybe that's why, I told you it sucked. Like I did not enjoy that assignment at all. But at the end of that 6 months, which by the way, I was able to deliver my assignment on time, and, everyone was happy with the work I've done. But I've learned 2 things about myself. I said, there is no way I want to be a programmer. I suck at this. But then number 2, oh my God, technology is awesome. And I want to find my way within this world, like within this industry. Like, what else can I try? Like, who else can I be? Right. And so then I dedicated the next, 10 years really of my career to, I continued to do some programming, but I also moved a little bit into QA, started with some manual testing, and then I've done automation, moved into business analysis, project management. And then ultimately I've also held, higher roles, being like in the C-level suite. But all of that experience really, allowed me to stay within the tech world. And I've seen in the early 2000s when the web became widely, popular, and we started migrating a lot of like desktop applications into the web, and like .NET became the big thing, right? Like everyone's, oh my God, .NET and like C# and whatnot, right? So I've always I was excited that this first job really allowed me to get excited about technology. And there was so much variety as to like what I could do and what kind of career I was able to pursue, that it really brought me to then, 2007, 8, 9, when I decided to launch my own business. Yeah.
The accumulation of all of it is what makes you who you are today. Everything that you've listed so far are parts of the puzzle that makes you be able to do what you do today, actually. And some of the fun stuff that you just mentioned, like .NET, my previous guest actually worked on the team like that was building .NET and like putting it on people's. It's so fascinating that the world, like, we're all connected somehow. Even though we're working on completely different things, we're all connected. One thing that I always geek out about, nowadays we have luxury of using great QA tools or like testing tools. We have like the Seleniums, we have the Playwrights, we have the whatever you want, the Puppeteers or whatever it's called for the one in Python and everything. But what actually was QA back then? Was it just like manually clicking on buttons? Because you were saying there was a bit of manual stuff where you walked around and you probably clicked on a couple of buttons and see if it worked. Or was there other tools back then that maybe are defunct today, but it's worth calling out just because that really was a part of your experience and what makes you today?
Yeah. So of course, everything began as what they called black box testing, which is you literally just pretending to be a user, and like the whole like QA as a discipline was just beginning to occur in the industry. It's like, oh, we really need to test our work, you know, let's create a profession out of it, right? And I remember a lot of schools pop up just teaching QA testing to people who, you know, for whatever reason decide not to go into programming. And there was actually a huge misconception that programmers actually used to say that, oh, those people who are not smart enough to be programmers are going into QA, which is a huge misconception. And you know what? Lots of respect goes to QA, because what they do, you know, they're being hackers. That's what they are. And to be a good, effective QA engineer, you need to know how to code, you need to understand architecture, you need to know how databases work. You also need to think creatively, right? So like, I would say, if anything, super talented programmers can go into QA, right? But you've mentioned tools, and yes, I do recall there was this tool called Test Director. And I don't know if it's still around. It would be fun to Google and see. But so that was a tool that I used, I remember, back in 1999, maybe 2000 timeframe. It's called Test Director. Yeah. And it was a combination of kind of screen recording when you click a button and you start kind of developing those scripts. But then you still had to go in and modify those scripts using programming language. Right? So you still needed to add your own kind of spin on it, right? Like if for instance, you wanted to run some edge cases against a certain data entry form. So the first thing you do is like you'd go and you click everything properly the way you want it to work, and you record that. And then you kind of play it back, and essentially the system just does it for you, right? And then you have to create a whole data set of different data elements that you want to be tested against. Right? So you have to be creative again and generate this data set. You couldn't just go into ChatGPT as you could now, right? And say, oh, generate a data set for such and such use case. No, you actually had to go and type it manually, and the ideas had to come from your head, right? And then you would enrich those tests with some additional edge cases. You'd be like, you'd actually write some code that say, okay, now in the next iteration, skip those 5 fields and see what happens. Right? Or try to input text data into numerical fields. See what happens. Right? So stuff like that.
Trust me, yes, I can't do my job without QA testers. QA people on the QA team, like, they're amazing. I cannot do my job without them at the end of the day. And one thing that I keep on saying, this podcast is very selfish, because I love asking these questions, because I'm going to geek out. I'm going to look at, what is it, Test Director, or whatever it's called. I'm going to have my little research. It's all because of these questions that I end up loving asking these. But one thing that I love hearing also is that some people realize that, hey, I don't want to do coding anymore. We all say it at some point in our life. Like, well, for the people who are currently coding or have coded, we all say it at some point. We don't want to be coding. I don't want to be coding anymore. And it happens differently, right? There's how do you call it? How do you make decisions based off of that? How do you decide, like, if not this, if not coding, then what? From your perspective, you're a person who loves doing research. From what I'm getting is that you're able to read books, you're able to reach out and get knowledge from elsewhere. So how did you end up going from, I guess, a little bit less coding into something more, I guess, like maybe project management, as you were describing? Like, what did that transition look like, and what resource helped you? Any kind of education or any kind of thing behind that as well?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this depends on your personality traits, like kind of your soft skills, right? Like, who are you as a person? Like, I'll tell you, before I tell you about my path, I'll just tell you, for instance, at JetRockets, when we see people like, and we have very talented coders who work at JetRockets, and we sometimes see once in a while that people are kind of either losing this excitement and motivation to just like write code all day, right? We try to identify those cases and be like, okay, we think you could be an excellent mentor, right? In addition to writing code, and we still need you to write code because afterward that's your job, but in addition to writing code, could you take responsibility and mentor like a junior team member, right? Could you become their teacher and help them get to like a higher level in their skills and their knowledge? And from what I'm seeing, a lot of talented developers actually find a lot of excitement in such opportunities to be able to pass on their skills, pass on their knowledge, because, as they say, you can only become an expert in what you do once you can teach it, right? So to be able to teach a skill, you got to know the skill, right? And So that's one path I was going to mention to some of your listeners who may be getting a bit tired of coding. Look into mentorship opportunities, look into sort of like team leading, right, opportunities, because yeah, it may seem, oh, come on, I can lead a team. It actually takes a whole new set of skills to become an effective team lead, right? Not every programmer can just by default lead a team. It takes a lot of different skills. But as about like my path, so I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial streak in me. I think I've always felt like I wanted a little bit more responsibility. I wanted, to make decisions, to make things happen. That's just been part of my personality, I think, from very early childhood. And so I think having specific hands-on experience and being able to talk to my team when I had my first project that was kind of given to me as, to lead and to manage, I think having that hand-on experience really allowed me to find better communication with my teammates, because they looked at me as someone who actually understood them and not just someone who created, I don't know, project plan and Gantt charts and just told them when to do things, right? I could actually speak their lingo, which was very important, right? And at the same time, I also had always been really good at acknowledging my strong kind of skills, right? I'm really good at those things, whereas maybe I'm not as good at some other things, and that's okay. And kind of being able to identify those elements and to be able to delegate and to be able to empower people who work with you and say, look, you know what? For instance, yes, I am the manager on this project, but you know what? I'm going to rely on you to make all the architectural decision about the platform we're building, because I know you possess better skills. I'm just a resource for you to get things done more efficiently and coordinate the work of everybody else, right? And so as I've progressed in those, and of course it takes experience. Like I remember I made so many mistakes on my first project because you think, oh, that's easy. I'm just going to get all the people in the room. We're going to put together a plan and we're just going to follow the plan. But it never works out in real life like that, right? I even remember I even got the... at that time, it was very sought after certification from the project management. It's called the PMP certification, like Project Management Institute. And I figured, oh, well, I'm a certified project manager, so I know exactly what to do. And honestly, the reality has nothing to do with what they teach you in the books. And I always the theory behind any project management methodology, be that Agile or Scrum, or like we've gone through so many, right, throughout the years. The theory is great, but when you actually execute and when you work with a team of people and when you have to deliver today, you have to be creative, man, right? Like you have to take the best of all these methodologies and be able to like make a salad out of them, right? Honestly, like mash them up together and just say, okay, we're going to work together towards a unified goal, and this is how we're going to do it. So yeah, I mean, education is super important. Like I said, I got my education, I got my certificates, I've listened to plenty of videos and audios and whatnot about the various approaches to project management. But at the end of the day is actually having that hands-on experience. I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah, you guys can't see this behind the screen, but I'm absolutely grinning. The way you're describing all of it, I was absolutely grinning in the sense of you have to be creative, man. I hear that very loud. I do engineering management nowadays, and yes, I relate to so many things that you're saying in the sense of like, yes, you have a lot of resources. Well, not everybody has a lot of resources, but you have resources. How do you work with it? What goes where? What functions? What doesn't function? And celebrate your failures. I've said this a million times, and you also just said it. Celebrate your failures, because I don't know a single person who has a perfect record. If you tell me that you work in tech and you have a perfect record, I don't think you work in tech. I'm kidding.
Oh.
I'm kidding, obviously, but it was something that I was talking about recently. It was really, really funny.
Yeah, Perry, actually, I agree with you 100%. And one of the questions I always ask when we interview people who want to join JetRockets, we always ask, especially for the positions of project managers, one of the questions we always ask is, can you tell me a story, or can you tell me about a time when you failed and what have you learned? And then tell me about a time that you were presented with the exact same situation and how you've applied the learning from the first time, right? And the red flags that I'm always looking for is when a person be like, oh, I've never failed. Well, then you haven't tried hard enough. You haven't taken enough risk. You haven't, like, it's simply not true. I do not believe that there's anyone with experience, right? Like if you don't have the experience, of course you've never failed. But if you have had the experience, if you've ran a couple of projects, like, of course there would be so many, like, oh God, I have so many examples of failures, but I don't view them as such. They're lessons. They're not, they're not a bad thing.
Absolutely. Oh, let me pull up my encyclopedia failures. I could give you the whole rundown of it. But,
oh, totally.
One thing that is really cool, though, and we're going to get to how you started JetRockets in just a second, but one thing that I get asked sometimes, and I have nothing to do with this business, but what is the difference between a project manager, a product manager, and a program manager? I don't know why I'm asking this question, but I get asked this a lot, and like for me, it's like, is there a difference and not difference? I respect all these different parts because I've worked with individuals with all these different titles, and I kind of get the slight difference, but maybe if you want to help me out a little bit, what is your take on what's the difference between those three? You don't have to answer if you don't want to. It's a stupid question at the end of the day.
No. I'll look, I'm going to, again, honesty, right, is the best policy. So I think, first I'm going to say that I think these three titles, yes, they're definitely, they could be different. But I think it's a great way of just having more resources work at your company. So I'm going to start with that, right? So obviously the job of a product manager is to actually manage the development of the product, meaning thinking from a product standpoint, how are we going to develop that product, what kind of features the product may need, I suppose working closely with the marketing team, working closely with the user test team, or, and kind of figuring out what features should we build and when. Almost like an interior designer, right? Like thinking about, like, should we add this armchair to your room or not? Something like that, right? A project manager is someone who coordinates the work that's being done, responsible for the budgets and the schedules and resource allocation. And the program manager is kind of someone who oversees both of them, right? Like, and I suppose that's the ideal scenario, and that allows people to kind of be 100% dedicated to just like their tiny piece of the puzzle. In reality, or at least I'll tell you at JetRockets, it doesn't work like that. Our project managers are project/product/program managers, if you will, right? And I think that you can be a lot more effective at managing resources if you know what the hell you're building and why. Right, so you need to understand the product. You can't just say, oh, my job is just to move dates on the calendar, or my job is just to create tickets in a project management system and just to assign them accordingly. Like, anyone can do that. Like, I don't understand why do you need a whole person just responsible for that role? And sometimes, again, like with very large projects in very large organizations, I can see, I can see that being applicable, but that's simply not how it works in my experience.
I'm so glad you shared that, just because there's, of course, a lot of factors. How big your company is, how big your project is, and the bigger the project, the more these different delineation of which part of the project or product you manage. But then smaller teams, you definitely don't need it in that case. I'm so glad I asked you these questions, just because at least my tangent about this is, like, I know at Apple they have these program managers, and they kind of manage a lot of, like, a program manager for the iPad, for example, is like getting all the pieces together. But then, like, a lot of people that work on the smaller pieces, just the fans or just the motherboard or whatever it is, they don't know what they're working on. They don't know that they're building it for the iPad. It's kind of where the program manager is there to make sure that, like, it's fine, we can piece all of this together. And, like, that's my tangent, just because I've heard this story from somebody at Apple, and I was like, oh, that's super, super, super fascinating.
I'm sure there is a reason for such approach, and maybe sometimes the reason could even be some sort of intellectual property protection or, anything like. I get it. But as an employee, if I imagine myself in such a situation, working in a silo, not really knowing what I'm contributing to, would be very, very demotivating to me. But that's just me, right? So I'm not saying that it applies to everyone, but, like, I want to know, like, if I'm a cog in this machinery, like, what is this machine that we're building? What is the purpose? Like, right? I think it's super important. So, again, I think it's important to everyone to really clearly understand the goal of the project that they're working on.
No, absolutely, yeah. And of course, like, that's their way of doing it. And you could talk about this if you have your own, whatever, $2 trillion, $3 trillion company at that point.
Sure.
I'm not the person to be telling them if it works or not at the end. But one thing that we alluded to a lot is JetRockets. This name has popped up so many times in your life and your career, but the beginning of JetRockets, even the name behind it, that's the bit I want to bridge the gap in terms of you've done a lot of stuff so far in our story, right? You've lived in different parts of the world. You've done some incredible feat of getting a job as a QA analyst, even seeing that you don't have a tech background, but still managed to understand what learning you gotta do, what resources you gotta do. But then from that point, you keep on growing, evolving, different roles. When did JetRockets start in this whole story? And even before that, why JetRockets? What's the name? What's the story behind that to begin with?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. There is no exciting story about why JetRockets. I think the name just we were literally sitting down and trying to find an available domain, like an available URL that we could buy for relatively cheap that would sound kind of exciting and fast and innovative, right? And I think we may have even used one of those web-based, suggest a name type of pages for me, and then it was it really didn't mean much. It was just the name that we found that had available URL that we could buy for the cheap back then, and it also sounded kind of cool, and it sounded okay in different languages.
Yeah, those are all factors, and trust me, this is not a disappointment at all in the sense of everybody has a reasoning, everybody has a thing behind what they do, and when you're talking about, even nowadays, the rocket emoji, trust me, like, it's absolutely flying everywhere. So, JetRockets, and one thing that I like discussing sometimes is how much time should you spend on deciding on a name, even naming variables, but also naming a company at the end of the day, because I've opened companies, and it's like, does this name sound good? And even like people naming their children, they'll be like, it needs to sound good in all the languages, or it needs to be like pronounced the same in all different languages. I feel like that has always been like decisions, but at some point you just decide with it and you go with it, and it seems like it's worked out.
Truth be told, that the legal name of the company is Nika Consulting LLC, and JetRockets is DBA. So we're doing business as JetRockets. So it's more of a brand name. Now, the legal name, actually, Nika Consulting, Nika is the name of my firstborn daughter. So
the DBA is so useful. I keep on saying it. Like, even the company I have, it's also a DBA. But this is so great. I love these stories behind the scene because everything we do is what affects our life. Everything that affects our life really drives what we do. So at what point did you realize that you wanted to start a company? Or like, tell me about the formation days. How many years by then were you working for other people, basically? You were working for other people so many years, and at some point be like, I'm my own entrepreneur with other people. So that formation period, what did that look like? Around when was it? Did you already have an idea? Did you already have a team? Like, I love these stories.
Oh, I'm excited to answer this because I think I have a pretty cool story. So I was working for a small company here in the city that was pretty much doing very similar things to what JetRockets does. We were building software for other people. And my job was chief operating officer at that time. And I've been with that company for about 3-4 years. And I kind of learned the business of running a software developing agency, right? That's essentially what it was. And I believe it was early 2008, when we had the big financial collapse and the company lost a lot of money, and my boss or the company owner was really contemplating shutting things down. Things were not going very well, partially because a huge portion of our clients came from the financial sector. So we were building kind of custom software applications for hedge funds, private equity firms, and such. And, lots of our clients just lost a lot of money as a result of 2008 collapse. So the company was kind of starting to go under. And, I decided to leave before that happened. So I quit. I quit. We parted ways more or less amicably. And I decided to take some time off and figure out what I was going to do next. And in the meantime, I had maybe like 3 months worth of cash at that point, to be able, I had about 3 months worth of money in the bank to be able to go and figure out what I was going to do next. And either I'm going to take another job at another company or what. And so I was doing a lot of networking, I was going to a lot of events like many people did. And at some point, I met someone who asked me, what I was doing, and I told them a story about my experience, and they said, "Oh, awesome, would love to see if you could help us with a project that we're contemplating because of your background, your understanding of the financial sector, etc. Could you help us as a product manager or a product designer, kind of like help us figure out what type of product we should build?" And I took on that role, and it was a freelancing gig that was really, very much part-time, but it kind of got my feet in the door with this one client. And I think I did my job pretty well because at the end of the project, which lasted about, like 6 weeks maybe, the client came to me and said, "Okay, awesome, would love to build it now. Do you have a team?" And I said, "Well, of course I do." Because kind of like, sure, just say yes and figure it out later type of approach. And literally that same day, and I mean, Perry, this is such a serendipity. That same day, I'm at another networking event, and I met this guy who tells me, "Hey, I have a team of developers in Russia who are looking for projects." And I say, "Oh, wow, amazing, because I have a whole bunch of projects," even though, I had one potential project. I mean, it's very important to present yourself in a better light. So I'm like, "Oh, I have like a bunch of projects that I could potentially give them, etc. Could you connect us?" And that's what he did. He actually connected me with this one guy. His name was Igor Alexandrov. He's currently the CTO of JetRockets. But the funniest thing of all, as it turns out, this person whom I met at this bar at the networking event did not know Igor before and did not actually have a team of programmers in Russia. He was bullshitting his way just the same way I was. Don't you love this? So what he's done actually is after chatting with me, he went on a website called Elance, which later was bought out by Upwork, I believe, but, very similar to Upwork. So it's kind of like a bunch of freelancers online looking for a job. And he found Igor, and he emailed Igor, and he said, "Hey, I have this project that needs to be done as soon as possible. Are you available?" And Igor said, "Of course I am available." And so then he connected the two of us. And the funniest thing of all, he disappeared. He got zero out of it. Like, he didn't get any money out of it. He never, neither Igor nor I have ever heard from this person again. So I don't know what happened, but that essentially, that's how we were brought together. And so we were connected, and we started, we got on a Skype. Zoom was not around, so we got on Skype, and we spoke, and Igor seemed like a very kind of hungry for work, and like, "Yes, I can do it, whatever it takes, I'll do it. And so that's how we got our first project. And it was just Igor and I was doing the kind of project management, product management, QA, and Igor was doing the programming. And we were literally working together in this very similar format to how you and I are talking right now, kind of looking at each other through Skype, right? Talking to one another and just coding and me testing immediately, kind of paired programming situation going. And within a month or two, Igor understood. He's like, "Look, I need help. I can't do it on my own." And then he involved his friend, Alexei, who became later our third co-founder. And I kind of like to joke that, and the rest is history, because we did a really good job with this project. The client was very happy, which resulted in referrals and then kind of recommendations on, and sort of this one project led to another project. And then, in about 6 months, we hired another person, and kind of it started snowballing from there. So that's the story of JetRockets.
I every step of it, I just kept on wanting to hear the word yes. Like everything in that story was like, yes, I could do this. Yes, we could do that. Yes, let's do this. So, and you absolutely delivered on that story in the sense of not only the story itself is amazing, but also the work behind that story, right? You can't go in there completely cold. The story that you had, there was no way at any moment that you came in the project cold. You knew what you were doing. You knew the skills that you had, and the people that you didn't know you were gonna meet. That's always the fun part. So shout out to networking events. One thing that entrepreneurs, you help a lot of entrepreneurs. You're an entrepreneur at the end of the day, but we're gonna talk real quickly in terms of at what point did you have to, I guess, like deal with the unsexy paperwork, legal work, and then we're also gonna talk about like after what happened. But at what point did you have to be like, oh wait, I have all these projects, what do I do with them? How do I make it, like the income, for example, like how does that work? So this is my Perry's entrepreneur mindset to be like, operation, how does it work? What did you do back then?
Yeah, so in the very beginning, when it was just two and then three of us, it was very simple, right? Like we were just operating as like three freelancers working together. Like the client paid me, and then I would pay these two guys, and we literally would just split the money. That was the agreement. We just went in, and we made enough to kind of feel good about ourselves. We didn't make like, oh my God, we're making millions. Of course not, but we made enough to cover our needs at that stage of our lives, and we just continued to work. And we didn't have any extra money left over or anything like that, but we kind of were. It wasn't really a business at that point. It was really, we've created ourselves a job, right? It was like pure freelancing, pure contracting. But as we started to grow, we definitely started to think about, oh, well, we can't do it all on our own, right? We started to involve other people. And it was really not before maybe we hit 12 people, as like 12 contractors working together, that we really kind of did this double, you do this double look and you're like, oh my God, do we have a company? What is going on? Right? So there was never a project plan. There was never a discussion of, oh, how are we going to do this thing? We just kept going. We got really excited about what was happening. We were really excited about working together. We kept ourselves busy. We kept money in the bank, and things felt good. It was easy, right? And then I think we hit about 12 people, like I said, and we sat down and we figured, hold on a second, that's where JetRockets appeared, right? So, okay, we need a name for this company. We need a website, we said, because we didn't even have a website for like the first couple of years. Because it was all just word of mouth. Our clients didn't really care if we had a website. We weren't marketing ourselves. We weren't selling anything beyond the clients that we already had. And so we got, the three of us got together. We got, we registered the name. I filed the DBA with the state of New York. And so Nika Consulting turned into into JetRockets. And then really, as we started to establish our presence in the market, things were just kind of started to pop up. Oh, we need to buy insurance. Oh, we need to deal with payroll. Oh, we need to deal with taxes. So a lot of the things we were really just we weren't thinking ahead a whole bunch, but we were addressing them as they popped up, right? And very early on in the process, I said to myself, I'm not going to try and do everything on my own, even though it sounds very lucrative because you're like, oh, I don't want to pay anyone. I don't want to outsource this work. I could do it myself. But then very quickly you realize that your time is super valuable. And I think it's important that you realize it early on. And so there's this like really cool book. It's called Profit First. And it's about, running your business with profit first in mind. So like a lot of companies, especially in the startup world, they kind of, the status quo has always been, oh, you got to grow the company. It's all about growth. It's all about revenues, right? And very few companies actually care about becoming profitable. But for us at JetRockets, profit was always the goal because this was our livelihood. We were bootstrapping. We were not like a VC-backed venture. So like for us, being profitable was important. So building our salaries, for the founders into our operating expenses from day one was kind of non-negotiable. Anyone running a service business has to understand that's how you grow. And so, to what I alluded earlier, not trying to take on too much and trying to, because at the end of the day, if you're going to try, and then a good example would be like, having an accountant, right? One could argue, oh, your accounting is so simple, which is true. It is simple. But at the same time, if it takes 2 hours of my time a day, I could use those 2 hours doing something a lot more valuable for the company. Or if not for the company, I could use 2 hours to spend with my family, which is not less valuable, And so being able to kind of make those decisions early on and say, look, I'm not an accountant, so I'm not going to take care of my accounting. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to draft up my agreements. I'm actually going to pay and outsource and make sure that these things are done well. Definitely not skipping on the insurance part. A lot of companies forget about, I need liability insurance. I need the cyber tech insurance. Yes, you do. Absolutely. Especially in tech. So just, and we address those things as they kind of popped up.
It's such a unique story. Not unique in the sense of you're the only person who have ever done it, but some people will be like, I'm going to make the company first and then find product market fit after. Or I'm going to start with the name and then build a website but then the other approach is you already have a machine running and it's mostly just like adding these more organizational boxes to make sure that you're covering, as you're saying, like the insurance. Insurance is never a joke in America, so that's definitely one part. The payroll and like even official contacts like correspondence, like there's a lot of stuff that you think about. And I really like your story of kind of having a product that you're able to sell already and then just tacking on this like more structured organization behind
that
it.
Is a must. Look, when I have clients who come to us today, even at JetRockets, and they say, oh, we need help developing such and such platform, my first question to them always 100% of the time is, do you have a go-to-market strategy? How are you going to sell this? What are you building? Why are you building this? Do you have potential clients? Do you have letter of intent? Like, why do you want to do this? Because if the answer is, oh, we haven't really figured this out, let me build it first, and like, do not waste your money. Yes, it would be very good for me to build your platform, but my goal is not just to build it and forget about you. My goal is to make you successful, and just like you said, prove the value first. And then start investing all these other steps. Like having a website, having a cool name, having a brand. Like, who needs your brand if it has no value?
I cannot disagree with what you just said. It sounds easy, but it's not. As you're saying, you want this relationship to grow. You want to be able to see a future, an outcome, a progress with all of that. And we're going to talk about the people that you work with nowadays in the sense of all these entrepreneurs that are looking for projects. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but maybe for me to geek out, what was the technology that was used to build the first website of JetRockets? Was it just pure vanilla HTML? I don't even know if you know this. So this is
I do.
Up. What was the technology behind that first JetRockets website?
We are such a Ruby shop.
Nothing wrong with it. Pure Ruby or Ruby on Rails or just
Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails. Yeah, anything Ruby. That's us. Absolutely. And again, this is not going to my earlier point of allowing people to utilize their strength. My CTO is the decision maker in terms of what technologies we use. And I'm not going to step on his toes. Like, I'm going to like, that's okay. You know what? I want him to make those decisions because that is his responsibility. My responsibility is growing the business. And he never tells me how to do it. So I will never tell him what technology to use or not to use. But we're definitely a Ruby shop.
No, this clarity is absolutely great. And of course, Ruby is great. People give it a lot of crap sometimes, but also Shopify uses it and they handle like trillions of requests all the time anyway. So there's a lot of pros and cons, but I'm sure Igor spent months, if not like hours or weeks or whatever long it takes to understand what technical decisions. And I could definitely spend a full hour talking about that, but I won't at the moment. If we talk about the entrepreneurs that you work with in the sense of like, it's so great that your field of work lets you meet and lets you talk to so many people who have ideas, creative, and the term that kind of gets brought up, is non-technical, as you were saying, because not everybody is fortunate to write their own website. Not everybody's fortunate to have 5 developers like working closely with them and building stuff together. So I guess describe to me, I guess, the persona of what is a non-technical founder. Is it me? Is it you? Like, what does that person look like? Because those are the people that you end up helping.
So most, like my ideal client, and oh my God, they're the best, right? Are the people who spent a significant amount of time within their respective industry. Let's say someone from the travel industry, or someone from the legal industry, or someone from healthcare, and in a non-technical capacity, right? So maybe an attorney or a travel agent, or I don't know, a teacher, and throughout their work, throughout their experience, they identify a gap in technology, some sort of gap that exists that is specific to their industry. And they're trying to solve that gap by using different platforms available out there. And, they try to experiment. They try to experiment by using tools that are supposedly built for those particular problems, but they quickly realize that those tools aren't good. So they try to experiment with other tools. And ultimately, they come to a conclusion that nothing exists on the market to close that particular gap. And so that's when they typically have the aha moment. And they're like, oh my God, if I am the pro in this industry and I have this pain point, so do everybody else who are like me. So why shouldn't I be the one to build a platform to solve this problem? And the reason I love these people so much is because just this exercise of trying to solve their problem using different solutions kind of completes the market research for them, right? Because they go out there and they conduct that market research. So by the time they come to me, they know that nothing exists on the market. They know that the problem is very real because they're experiencing on a daily basis. And they know that a potential solution would be extremely beneficial to their particular industry.
Yeah. See, because there is, I don't know, how do I describe this? There is a need for it in the sense of course, like, there's stuff that people want in terms of, like, it would be nice to have to do this. But there's something with you that's like, hey, we're helping people already. How to make it better? I have this random example in my head. It's like, imagine I'm like a head of a fire department, and I need to make my response time better. I need to make it more manageable to know what is where and what happens. Like, I feel like that would be a good use case of being like, can we build a solution that really optimizes the whole fire department? And that's something that, imagine I'm a somebody like that, and I come to JetRockets. What does that usually look like?
Yeah, but I was just going to say, JetRockets is not going to be your first stop. First, you're probably going to go to other fire departments and be like, what do you guys do? And then you go somewhere else, or you go to your headquarters, or, whatever the hierarchy of fire, department structure is. So you go to those places and you try to solve the problem. You don't even think about solving it through technology first because you're not a technical person. This does not come to you like it does to many of us, of people like you and I, right? We just like dream up technical solutions because that's what we do all day. But these people don't. So by the time they get to me, they know it's a pain. They've spoken to 100 other fire departments and everybody said, oh my God, we don't know how to do it, but if you can figure it out, let us know. We're on it.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So I'm glad I think about these examples and you're able to be adjusting to all this. This is great. One question that this bothers everybody in tech, or people that try to manage any project in tech, is t-shirt sizing a project, right? You have solutions, requests, all that kind of stuff, and t-shirt sizing, some people use Fibonacci, some people use small, medium, large, whatever it is. I guess, what is you and your team, of course, like the approach of t-shirt sizing a project? Because a lot of what you do has projects of different sizes, I'm assuming. So what is your take on that? And what, I guess, tips do you have for the people like us out there?
Oh my God, that's the ultimate, that actually is the ultimate thing that if anybody were to solve, right, that would benefit everybody in the world, not just the industry, but like everyone working with the industry. So I do not have a magic solution, but I can tell you what we do. So for majority of my clients, when they come to us, they typically, they have limited budgets and they want to make sure that we're able to use that budget the most efficiently, right, in the most effective way. So what we try to then say is we try to focus on just starting out with an MVP, right, the minimum viable product. And in my opinion, and please feel free to disagree, anything that takes more than 8 to 12 weeks, depending upon complexity, is beyond an MVP. So in my mind, up to 12 weeks. That's how long an MVP should take from, soup to nuts, right? So like you start with design and then you code and then you test. This entire process should not take longer than 12 weeks. If it does, we're not dealing with an MVP anymore. And so, knowing that allows us to then take a look at the project, break it down into kind of like feature list, and together with the client, using our experience building many, 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 many different projects, we can say, okay, yes, we know you want to build this rocket ship, but this rocket ship looks like, 2-year project. Let's not start there. Let's start with just a minimum viable product that you can bring to market. Start proving your hypotheses. Could potentially use it to, gain some traction, maybe even fundraise. So then together we work with the client on figuring out what the scope of that MVP looks like, and immediately we're limited by the 12 weeks, which allows us to then, work within a limited budget. And we can do it because, we know what, the budget required for us to have a team of people work on a project for 12 weeks. So we kind of work backwards. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And I actually love your answer in the sense of when we talk about t-shirt sizing, I described earlier like Fibonacci and small, medium, large. None of that is quantifiable. And that's something that not only business stakeholders hate, like product managers sometimes just hate having a non-quantifiable. So the way that you answered in the sense of like, yes, let's talk about weeks for a second. And I'm from the tech world, of course, but I love having a common language to be like 12 weeks for an MVP. It's definitely on the large side, because everything bigger than that is like, it's not an MVP if you're spending a half a year doing it. It's not an MVP. Yeah. That's when you question the word V in there, right? What is viable? Is it really the viable piece? Is that really the feature that you want? So I'm just glad that you're able to nail it down. 8 to 12 weeks, whatever. Of course it's flexible, but
yeah. And I'll tell you, for me it's super important not to operate in those terms, because, like the t-shirt sizing or that, because I'm dealing with non-tech founders. It's super important for me to be able to speak their language that they understand, and they understand budgets and time.
Are you sure they don't understand what the number 9 means or whatever it is? Because funny enough, the number 9 is not even part of Fibonacci. So that's like the crazy part behind that. So one thing that I do want to ask you in the sense of how do you know the composition of team working on a project? Maybe you spend a lot of time thinking about this, but let's say there's a project that comes in and it's like, what resources, just because not only of engineers, but anybody who's working with a lot of resources, you have to make a decision in terms of how to plug stuff together. So maybe time zones, or maybe different areas, or how do you make a project work? What does that thought process looks like when you have a project and then it's like, okay, we got to deliver this project. How do we fix the compositions together?
Yeah, so we start, again, we take several things into consideration, right? Like, because not every project is made equal, and sometimes, 12 weeks of developing a marketplace is not 12 weeks of developing some sort of, blockchain trading bot, right? So like you need very different skill set for those. So depending upon what the project is all about in the industry, we take 2 things into consideration. One, of course, the seniority and the experience of the engineer. But 2, we also take into account the engineer's interest. Because we have some engineers who absolutely love working on anything fintech related. And that's where they shine the most. This is what gets them out of bed in the morning. This is what they want to do. They want to solve, complex solutions. And then we have engineers who prefer working on a simpler, when I say simpler, let's say they're not necessarily simpler, but other areas, right? Be that travel related, or maybe education, or they may be excited about healthcare stuff, right? So we try to take those elements into account as well, because look, not only do I have to think about the well-being of my clients, I also have to think about the well-being of my talent, because I want to retain that talent, right? I want to make sure they get to work on challenging yet exciting and rewarding assignments. And then finally, we try to make up teams that always have a combination of kind of seniority within the team, because if I have all senior level guys in a project, guys and gals of course in a project, well, that can create a lot of tension, because everyone is a decision maker suddenly, right? Everyone knows best. if I have, let's say, all junior or middle level, then there's not enough skill set on the project. So what I do, it's always about, having a very senior, very strong technical lead and a combination of sort of medium to junior level people who are able to not just to execute the work, but also learn and get stronger as the project progresses. Because it's very important for me to work on the development of each and every employee of the company.
Because I keep on saying this because I relate to a lot of it. I work with so many great engineers, and it's figuring out even like the sizes, right? Like too many people in the kitchen. You can't have 7 engineers working on one thing. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's smaller, even though you are in the same pod or same squad or whatever it is. You don't work on the same project because there's too many people in there
at some
on
point,
the same time.
9 women cannot have a baby in 1 month. So it's not always the number of people. Sometimes you can get, it's the approach. Not everything can be done in parallel. And it's important. It's kind of the duration of the project. Sometimes we get those questions, right? We say, oh, it'll take, let's say 12 weeks. And the client will be like, well, if we add more people, can we have it done in 6 weeks? And the answer is often no, because some of those things are not parallel. You cannot do them in parallel. Some of them consecutive. So
no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad I asked these. And the other part to me is when you're talking about the engineer's interests, right? This is always fun just because I know I'm an engineer who's passionate about some area. But there's also engineers out there who like do not care which area because they just love working with tech. And tech is kind of agnostic, right? Like, of course, there's a HIPAA if you work in healthcare, and there's like the other like SOX and everything else in different industry. But the part of interest and making sure that hey, at least what people are interested in. One thing that I don't know if you've ever done before, but sometimes during like quarterly plannings, I have a bunch of projects. And one thing I've tried once was, do you know what white elephant is? It's basically like around Christmas time, there's this kind of event that people do usually at the office or between teams, and it's like everybody brings a gift and they put it in the middle of a table, and then you kind of go around. You kind of have like a ranking. People pull up a number, and I get to go first, somebody gets to go second, blah, blah, blah. And you get to pick either a gift from the middle of the table or somebody else's gift that they already took. So you kind of go around and you get to choose, and I kind of did that with the projects that we had coming in for that quarter. And it was funny because there wasn't really any conflicts or anything crazy, but it's kind of a sense where people got to choose, right? People got to express what their interests are, knowing like a bit what is at stake at that point. So I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but I feel like everybody has a different framework of prioritizing project or figuring out what people are interested in. And the way you're describing how the seniority and what people's interests are, and how, I guess, the delivery dates, right? Like those hard requirements. There's a bit of parallel in terms of how people approach these problems with different frameworks.
Oh, it's such a cool idea. I may borrow it from you, the white elephant, and have people fight for a project. We actually, a lot of our work is actually long-term retainer based. So we do have projects that last for years, literally. And every once in a while, we do try to swap resources because we don't want people to get kind of like bored and stale, right? And and sometimes adding new talent actually can push a lot of momentum forward, right? You can by bringing in new talent, you can kind of revive a project that's kind of becoming stale, right? And so we try to do that. But of course, we recently had an exercise where a project that's been with us for several years, there was an opportunity to do some resources swapping. And I was very surprised that several people, like most people who've been on this project for several years, just wanted to stay. I'm like, oh, come on, you can work on something new and exciting. And they're like, no, we're good. We actually love it here. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Don't fix what's not broken,
Yeah, exactly. This is great, especially, and even on the objective side of like having new people working on different parts of the project, you reduce the bus factor.
Yes.
And for the people non-tech talking about bus factors, basically just spread your knowledge. Make sure that if all the knowledge is within a single person and they get hit by a bus, then you're kind of screwed. So that's kind of the bus factor explanation behind all of that.
That is super important. And, I'd be the first one to lie if I were to say that we've never experienced the bus factor. Not literally somebody gotten hit by the bus, but actually having knowledge being kind of all, within one person's mind, that is never a good idea. And we've gone out of our way to minimize those situations by a combination of different things. First, cross knowledge sharing. This is something we do quite often where, engineers from one team will just be telling and sharing stories about their project to engineers from another team. But also within a project itself, having engineers always kind of work across different areas of the product. And of course, having documentation, which is always easier said than done, right? It's always easy to create this first documentation. The maintenance, it's a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah, wait till somebody has a bot that does all of it. Perry loves writing some docs, but hey, we're not going to talk about that. One thing that I love asking people that have so many, I guess, like responsibilities, projects, optimism between all this is, how do you run your day-to-day? Especially the part, what software do you need? What apps do you need? Like, what are must-have apps for Natalie? Is probably Perry's question over here, just because everybody's slightly different. But I do want to hear in terms of how you do your day-to-day, what application, what software is top tier for you at the moment?
Yes, so Slack and Notion are the two products I cannot live without. I kind of wake up in the morning, I have my morning coffee, and this goes against all, those awesome articles when you read about high-performing entrepreneurs and they don't open their computers until after they do yoga and meditation and a lot of other stuff. Well, I'm not that. I'm sorry. I wake up in the morning, I grab my morning coffee, and I read my Slack because I love it. I'm addicted to it. I go through all the channels just to stay on top of things. Again, I don't work so much in the company nowadays, which is great. This is exactly where I want to be. I'm not in the day-to-day operation involved in every project, but I want to know what's happening, not because I'm a control freak, but because if a client were to call me any moment of the day, I want to be able to have an intelligent conversation, and I think it's important. And I think that's what sets us apart, is that I am in the know. Yes, I'm not part of the active team, but I'm in the know. So I'll go through Slack, and then Notion is definitely our kind of source of all truth, JetRockets. So we have Notion that we maintain quite religiously, and we have knowledge bases that we've built over the course of the last couple of years for project managers, for our QA. So like when we onboard people, they know exactly where to go and how we do things. So we've documented our processes quite extensively, which is good. I love it. And of course, ChatGPT has been my go-to for many, many things. And I use it, honestly, I use it for kind of sometimes idea generation, right? Like I would never ask ChatGPT to write something and then just like post it as is, because that would be very silly and obvious. But, I'm not going to lie and say, oh, I never use ChatGPT for any of the content I create. Of course I do. I'll have it, I'll have create an outline for me, and then I'll fill it out with my own words because I think it's important, right? Or sometimes I'll use it to, just recently actually was an interesting part, an interesting example. I was sent a piece of code, one of our developers sent, who was complaining about something in that piece of code, and I really didn't feel like having to go through it and figure it out. So I just posted it in ChatGPT and I said, "What, give me in English. What does it do?" And, it did that. I'm like, okay, awesome. Love it. So, but most of it is Slack and Slack and Notion, like I said. And we use Asana for project management, but I told you I don't do daily operations anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's still very progressive, because the thing is, like, people sometimes with new tools and new technologies, like, Perry sometimes have this doubt in mind, be like, is it worth migrating to this new tool? Is it worth using this new tool? But then again, you see all these benefits and being able to leverage them, like even the Slack in the morning, like the mark as unread on Slack. I do that a lot, where it's like just mark it as unread because I have to come back to it at some point. Those are very, very progressive and new things that come up, and somebody like you who's able to use it wisely, the ChatGPTs and Notions, like using it wisely is what lets you do what you do. So thanks for sharing a lot of that list at the end of the day. One thing that I do want to mention is that you do write a lot of great stuff out there on the internet. If you ever look up the posts that you publish out there, it's really, really fun. I've read a couple.
Thank you. And I promise you, this is not ChatGPT talking. It's my content, original.
Yeah, and to give us not a sneak peek, but to give just a bite of something is like for me to ask you the question, how do you optimize their website for voice search? It's something that I've never really thought about that you talk about in the sense of it's useful because when you talk about accessibility, when you talk about people that because I've worked on different projects where we get feedback from somebody be like, oh, I'm visually impaired and using your application was seamless. Like those really mark me as we built this stuff. So yeah, any kind of like I guess reasoning or how you've managed to find these like exciting titles or exciting like topics to talk about.
Well, actually, credit goes to one of our clients, frankly, who came to us. And, just like many companies in the space, we often overlook, audience that is not readily available that comes to mind, right? Like overlook people with accessibility issues. And it's a shame. And I'm actually very glad that it's now a law and make sure, your websites and everything you put out there has to be accessible. And that's, I'm glad it's now the norm. But the credit for this particular article, I believe, goes to one of our clients who came to us, and the company's name is eventspace.com. And he came to us about 2 years ago, and we built his platform. And to him, from the very first conversation we had, one of his top requirements was accessibility. So he brought it into focus for us a couple of years ago. He's like, look, I want to make sure that whoever I'm working with understands the importance of accessibility. I want my website, my web platform, everything that it represents, from the design to the layout to everything, to be fully accessible to people with accessibility limitations. And so we learn a lot from our clients. And then, we share that knowledge, and we share that knowledge not just with other clients, but we also share it with the world because I think it's important.
I honestly, I find this so fascinating and admirable because it's not easy. Actually, the easiest thing you could do for accessibility on your website is adding the alt tag to your image, like your open bracket image, add an alt tag in there. That's going to be already a major step between not having support for that, but also having support for that.
Description of the image is important. Yes.
But one thing, I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but one thing that I guess will help, I mean, you've helped me so much in this conversation of figuring out, hey, you could do this. It's so relatable. Everything that you mentioned is very relatable. It's reachable. Everything that you do is like, it's not out of this world, right? So for my question would be, anybody who's doing what we are today, and we want to bring it to the next level. I want to have more purpose of my company's mission, or I want to have more purpose on my software engineering mission, or I'm not in tech and I want to get into tech, or I want to work with websites and all that kind of stuff. Like any kind of general advice from you in terms of having seen so many examples and so many experience of people from different backgrounds building stuff. What advice do you have for builders and creators and people that want to just achieve more in their journey?
Yeah, well, I think the key really, and when I think about myself or when I think about some of the amazing founders we work with, is to pursue something that you are personally excited about, that makes you happy, right? And I mean, I know it sounds cliche, kind of like, do what you love to do and then, the money will follow. But it truly works that way, because when you do something that you are excited about, you do it well, because you have no other option of doing. Like if you love your job, if you love what you do, you have no other option but to do it well. And when you do something well, then the money will follow. Right? The success will find you eventually. It may not be overnight. As we know, every overnight success story takes 10 years in the making. So you have to be patient, but you also you have to double down on something. And you just have to really do it for the right reasons, right? I think it's very important. Like if you do something, do it for the right reasons. Like I think the main reason why JetRockets focuses on non-tech founders, and that is our niche, that is our place in the world. So many companies that do what we do, but we've decided to own this niche because that's what I am personally excited about. And that excitement, I think I was able to kind of bring it down to all of my teammates. And we are all excited about helping these non-technical people break into this kind of like very, Silicon Valley bro type of industry and be like, we can be successful. I mean, our founders, they look very different. They sound very different. They come from different backgrounds, different ages. And that's what makes it super exciting. Like, we almost bring, we make tech accessible for people like them.
I love that, in the sense of some of the words you said was the only option is doing well. I love that mindset, just because I could wake up to that every day. Where could people find Natalie Kaminski? I know you're already on the web and everything, but what's the best way to follow up with you with JetRockets?
Yes, so you can find JetRockets at jetrockets.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Natalie Kaminski. And you can actually email me directly at natalie@jetrockets.com. I love getting tons of emails, and, I try to respond to most of them.
Feedback is the most valuable thing in the world, so I absolutely love hearing it from you. And of course, if you guys want to find all links, it will be shared in the description notes below, so definitely check those out. But honestly, on behalf of Perry, I think it was an absolute pleasure talking to you with all the stories that you mentioned. Once again, Natalie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's such an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it, and you made it so fun and easy to talk to. So thank you, Perry.
Signing off from our end, I will definitely catch you guys on the next one. Bye. And that was Natalie Kaminski, co-founder and CEO of JetRockets. All the links are shared in the description notes below. Go check them out. If you would like to be on Podcast Room by a Software Engineer, reach out to us. Just email contact@perrytiu.com. Can't wait to have you on the show. Once again, thank you so much for listening to Podcast Room by a Software Engineer. Don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast app and leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's completely free. And if you want to tell your friends about Podcast Room by a Software Engineer, that's totally cool as well. Anyways, I am Perry Tiu, and I'll catch you on the next one. Big love.